Zachas Kesubos Daf Lamed primarily discusses the topic of kamle min Rabbi Minei, that is the rule that if somebody has a very severe punishment, he cannot be obligated to pay a knas or a fine or a tashlumin for the same activity. The Gemara will discuss whether that applies to a misas beis din, capital punishment given by a court at the same time as a fine, or kares, does it apply to kares that's given by the same time, and then later does it apply to misa b'dei shemayim as well. So we've learned one of those positions on that topic from our Mishnah. The Gemara will show a conflicting approach at this point and give two explanations as to his source and the differences between them. So let's begin the Gemara. We're discussing the topic of somebody who is ma'anis in Isha. He raped someone, and therefore he has to pay knas for that. He has to pay knas to her father if she was an ara. At the same time, that bia that he did when he raped her may have also been a bias iser. So that bias iser could sometimes incur kares and could sometimes incur misa biad vezdin. The bezdin could give him the death penalty for that if it's something like achoso or those kind of isurim. So our Mishnah had said that if it's a kares iser, if he's chayav kares for that, he does have to pay the knas. Kares doesn't get you out of paying the knas. If, however, the implication is, and we'll see this explicitly in the next mission, Daf Lamed Vav, if, however, it's misas beis din, he does not have to pay knas at the same time as that. The Gemara is going to show that Rav Nechuni ben Hakana disagrees, and he says is that even for kares, you don't have to pay knas if he incurs kares at the same time as this knas, if the bia was a chayve kares. Just before that, the Gemara concludes its last discussion by saying that if the woman was a nida, so there is no isser marrying a nida, and therefore the fact that he also needs to marry her is not a problem. Whether the obligation is that it should be someone that he's permitted to marry, or someone that is only a chayve lav, but there's tfisas kedushin. Either way, he's allowed to stay married to a nida, and he's allowed to. There is tfisas kedushin on a nida, so the fact that she's a nida is not a problem as far as those halachos. The question here is, how does it apply to kamle midravine? So the Gemara says our Mishnah clearly holds that kares does not get him out of knas because of kamle midravine. The Gemara, however, says that Rav Nechuni ben Hakana disagrees, and he says that kares does get a person out of knas for kamle midravine. The case that he was discussing is a person who is mechalal Shabbos and Yom Kippur by doing an iser, by, let's say, burning somebody else's property, which would make him have to pay back for the damage that he caused, but at the same time, he did Chil Shabbos or Chil Yom Kippur. So Chil Shabbos is Misa Bidei Bezdin, that's Kares. There everyone agrees that he doesn't have to pay because the burning gets him Misa Biad Bezdin. The question is about Yom Kippur, and Rav ben Hakana says the same thing applies to Yom Kippur. He gets Kares, it also gets him out of having to do Knas. Now, therefore, Rav ben Hakana would say that if the cases in our Mishnah which are Chayav Kares, he would not have to pay Knas as well. So now the Gemara goes into what is Rav Nechuni ben Hakana's source. So we're going to have two approaches, Abaye and Rava, and then the Gemara will say the differences between them. So the first source is from Abaye. Abaye says the entire source of the concept of kamle midravine comes from the pasuk describing where two men are in a fight and one of them accidentally hits a pregnant woman. There he would have to pay a monetary fine for the causing damage to the fetus. He would get misa if he killed her, if she dies. The pasuk there clearly says is that if she dies, then he doesn't have to pay for the fetus. If she doesn't die, so he doesn't get misa for that, he does have to pay for the fetus. So that's where you can't get two things. If he gets misa for killing the woman, he would not have to pay for the fetus. However, the word that's used there is asoin. The word asoin is used somewhere else as well. It's used when Yaakov Avinu told his sons not to take Binyamin down to Mitzrayim because an asoin is going to happen. Says Abaye, the word asoin in the context of the two men fighting is talking about a human asan, where the woman would be killed because she was struck by a human hand. In the case of Yaakov warning his sons, he was talking about something happening bidei shemayim. He could get attacked, he could get sick. Binyamin, something terrible could happen to him along the way, bidei shemayim. So the word asan is used in both. It's linking some tragedy that befalls a person bidei shemayim and a tragedy that befalls a person bidei adam. The two of them are therefore linked. And therefore, kares and the tragedy that's given out by the Beis Din, which is Bidei Adam, those two things are therefore linked. And the same halacha applies to both. So if the Beis Din kills a person, or if Kares kills a person, that's Bidei Shemayim and Bidei Adam. Those two things are the same. And just like the punishment meted out by the Beis Din gets a person out of Knas, the punishment given by Shemayim of Kares also gets a person out of Knas. So before we get into Rava's approach, the Gemara has a couple of questions here. The Gemara says, first of all, you're assuming that Yaakov was warning the Shatim about something that's going to happen Bidei Shemayim. Who says maybe he was warning them something that's going to happen to Bidei Adam? And it's talking about that maybe Bidei Adam will be attacked or eaten by an animal, something which is not Bidei Shemayim. What gives you the assumption that that's talking about Bidei Shemayim? And you could therefore link it to the word Asa into this case, which is Bidei Adam. So the Gemara says, how is that logical? Yaakov was warning them about all things, Bidei Adam and Bidei Shemayim. So it should also apply to Bidei Shemayim and should still be linked to this thing that's Bidei Adam. Now, the example of what the Gemara had used as an example of what Yaakov would be warning them as Bidei Shemayim is Tzinim Upachim. That's a cold and a heat stroke. That Binyamin would have been struck by those two things. So the Gemara now asks, hold on a second. You were saying that cold and heat stroke is Bidei Shemayim and attack by a person, by an animal, is Bidei Adam. We have a brayso that seems to say otherwise. The brayso says everything is in the hands of Shemayim except for Tzinim and Pachim. And that's learned from a pasuk which says, Tzinim upachim b'derech ikei shomer nafsho yirchak mehem. Somebody's meant you're responsible to take care of yourself and make sure you don't get a heat stroke, make sure you don't catch a cold. That's your own issue. So that's a person's own responsibility. If he ends up getting struck by those two things, that's his own failing. It was his own foolishness. That's not Bidei Shemayim. So why are we saying here that is Bidei Shemayim? Second of all, you said that an attack by a lion or by a thief, a human, is called Bidei Adam. That's also not true. Those things are called Bidei Shemayim. Where do you see that? Because Rav Yosef says, and we learned in a brayso, Rav Chia says, from the time that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, even though there's no Misas Beis Din given out by Sanhedrin, there is Misas Beis Din anyway. The Gemara says Misas Beis Din, there's no Misas Beis Din. The Gemara says it means that the din of Misas Beis Din still exists, even though Beis Din doesn't give them out. So if somebody does something which would have gotten him skila, he'll get skila min hashamayim. He'll fall off the roof, or he'll get attacked by a lion. Somebody who's chayev sreifa, burning, he'll either fall into a fire, or he'll get bitten by a snake, which is considered to be sreifa. It's venom that goes into him and creates a burning sensation. Somebody who was chayev to be killed with a sword, he'll either be given over to the government, which will kill him by sword, or he'll be attacked by thieves, which will kill him with a sword. Somebody who was chayev chenek, that's strangulation, he'll either drown, which is also killing by the inability to breathe, or he'll be killed by a disease which causes asphyxiation, a disease called sarunchi. So therefore, the Gemara is saying that all these things are also Bidei Shemayim. Shemayim is creating all these. So the Gemara therefore says, okay, fine, switch it, no problem. Attacks by humans or by lions are Bidei Shemayim, Tzinim and Pachim are Bidei Adam. Either way, you still have both that are being warned against, and therefore it is linked to the case of Asam. All right, so this was all Abaye. Now we get to Rava's approach. Rava says, Shita, that someone who gets kares gets out of knas from the same time, because kamle b'ramine, that is learned from somewhere else. That's learned from somebody who is over Avodah Zarah and gives his child over to the Avodah Zarah called Molech. He kills his child by bringing him into a fire as part of this avodah. And the Torah there says, if the courts don't punish the person, I will punish him, Hashem says, and his family, and he'll get kares. So the Torah is saying, you're supposed to give him Misas Beis Din. If you don't, I'll give him kares. Clearly putting Misas Beis Din and kares together and saying that they are the same. That being the case, just like Misas Beis Din gets a person out of Knas, because Kamei Min Ramine, kares also gets a person out of Knas, because Kamei Min Ramine. All right, now the Gemara says, what is the difference between Abaye's source and Rava's source? So the Gemara says the difference is clear. Rava's source specifically talked about kares. It's only kares. We know that Misa of the Beis Din gets you out of Knas, and Kares therefore gets out of Knas. What about Misa Bidei Shemayim? That's when a person dies of natural causes, but it's not Kares. Kares is much more than Misa Bidei Shemayim. Kares is if he dies without children and he's spiritually cut off. Someone who gets Misa Bidei Shemayim, like for example, a Yisrael who eats Truma, that's Misa Bidei Shemayim. So, according to Rava, that would not be included. He would not have to pay for the Truma. He would have to pay for the Truma. There would be no kamle b'ramine on the fact that he is getting Misa B'dei Shemayim at the same time that he's stealing someone else's Truma. Now, according to Abaye, it was just Ason B'dei Shemayim. Ason B'dei Shemayim also includes Misa B'dei Shemayim, and therefore he would have kamle b'ramine. He would not have to pay for the Truma that he took away when he eats it. So the Gemara says, but that doesn't seem to be correct. You're telling me that according to Abaye, he would have come in Ramine, and he would get out of having to pay for it. The problem is that the stealing of the Truma and the Chiyuv Misa B'dei Shemayim don't happen at the same time. First, he steals the Truma, and he's chayav to pay it back, and he doesn't get Misa B'dei Shemayim until he eats it. You have a case where Rav Chisda says clearly, if somebody steals chayla from his friend, and then he eats it, so he has to pay from the moment he stole it, and then he eats it, and now he's mischayav ben afshay, now he gets Misa B'dei Shemayim for that. Okay, so there's no kamle b'dei ramine on that. That says clearly, well, a chaylev is not Misa B'dei Shemayim, a chaylev is kares, but there's no kamle midraba mine on that, even according to the opinion that kares has a kamle midraba mine. So therefore, these two things don't happen at the same time. It has nothing to do with his entire sugya. So Gemara says, okay, so we'll have to change the case a little bit. It's not that he stole truma and then he ate it. Then you'd be right. He has to pay from the time he steals it, and he only is maschayev menafshe from when he eats it. However, it could be if somebody else took it and stuffed it into his mouth. So when it got into his mouth, he ate it and stole it at the same moment. So Gemara says, not necessarily. It's not true. From when he puts it in his mouth, he stole it, but he's only mischayev ben afsha. He only gets misa when he swallows it. So Gemara says the case will have to be that it was stuffed into his throat. It was stuffed into the place where it's already considered to be a swallowing kind of a state. So then the mischayev ben afsha, the misa b'dei shemayim, and the stealing happened at the same instant. Gemara says, well, not exactly. Let's be more specific over here. Was it put in a place that he can't cough it back up, or he could cough it back up? If he could cough it back up, then it's not eaten yet. It's only when he actually gets it past the point of no return that it's eaten. And if he can't cough it back up, then he's not chayav anything. The person stuffed it into his mouth. He didn't do anything. He was totally an ones. So then you can't be chayav for that at all. So the Gemara gives three answers for this. Answer number one, the Gemara says it was put in a place where he can cough it back up b'doichek. It's considered to be stolen already and eaten already at that moment, because it is, he could theoretically cough it back up, but it would be ruined at that time. It would be mias, and it would be ruined, and therefore it's swallowed and eaten and stolen at the same instant. That's the Gemara's first answer. That's the second answer is Rav Papo says we're talking about liquids. Liquids are mias, and they're considered to be stolen from as soon as it goes into his mouth and swallowed at the same time. It's all considered to be happening at the same time. Rav Ashi says we're talking about a different thing. We're talking about somebody ate his own truma. He didn't steal anything. But at the same time that he was eating his own truma, meaning it's Yisrael, he separated truma and then he ate it. There's no stealing. But at the same time that he did it, he ripped somebody else's shirt. So Rav Ashi is the only one that this works, because he says if you do one iser that's kares or misa b'dei shemayim in one thing, and you do a totally different iser, not the same action, totally different iser at the same time, that still gets kamle min ramine. So here, he's eating his own truma, and then at the same time, he's ripping somebody else's shirt. Those two things still have kamle min ramine according to Rav Ashi, and that's how this works